This isn't a tournament where it's like everything's on the line, you know. And if I don't get the points here with that I have to defend, I'll get them somewhere else. So even when I lost the first set today, I was just thinking, you know, that was a good first set. I was able to compete. She played well when it counted, and I think that's kind of also the mindset that helped me sustain throughout the rest, like the other 2 hours of the match.
A $47 million spectacle was meant to be a celebration, yet somehow it unraveled into a storm of blame no one anticipated. When Alexandra Eala bowed out of the Miami Open, the numbers didn't just slip. They revealed something the Women's Tennis Association never intended for the spotlight. Millions disappeared. Fans stepped back. And suddenly, the very player who fueled the excitement was turned into the issue. But here's the question no one is truly answering. Was she ever really the reason everything collapsed?
The 2026 Australian Open, where there were extraordinary scenes this morning as Filipino player Alexandra Eala was greeted by hundreds of Filipino fans during her practice session out the back of Melbourne Park. Eala is number 49 in the world, and she's really captivated the hearts and minds of the Filipino community here in Melbourne after she became the first Filipino player to win a Grand Slam match at the US Open in 2025. It's fair to say that most players would have found that scene a little confronting given the number of people who swarmed her for autographs and photos after her practice session, but she took it really well. She stopped to say hi to the fans, and then she left the practice court.
If you feel like Alexandra Eala is only at the beginning of something special and her biggest moments are still ahead, hit subscribe and stay locked in for everything coming next. Because just days before, everything about the 2026 Miami Open felt unstoppable. The energy was rising, the crowds were louder, the tickets were selling faster, and the spotlight burned brighter than it had in years. It didn't feel like just another tournament anymore. It felt like the start of something bigger.
From Indian Wells, a tennis tournament in Palm Springs, and one of the people that I was most excited to see was Alexandra Eala, the 20-year-old sensation from the Philippines. And I got to watch the match she played. Filipino fan energy, it was electrifying. It definitely helped Eala persevere through the night. And one of the reasons that I really wanted to see her match was that I wanted to feel the Filipino crowd. I was so looking forward to being part of this Filipino fan energy because it's one of the things that's most talked about in what Alexandra Eala.
It felt like a moment, the kind organizers dream about but can never quite control. And right at the center of it all was a 20-year-old who had somehow turned simple anticipation into full-blown obsession. But this is where the story begins to shift because everything changed yesterday.
I know Phoenix has had a strong start to the year with Doha, but just what do you think kind of led to the turnout?
I think she played really well, and I definitely did not play my best, but of course that's also a big part because of how she played, you know. But yeah, I think there are some details that I could have done better and maybe would have, and if I had done those better, maybe would have resulted in a more competitive match, but I'm still really happy.
A $47 million tournament was meant to feel like a celebration, but somehow it drifted into a storm of blame no one anticipated. When Alexandra Eala stepped out of the Miami Open, the numbers didn't just slip. They revealed cracks the Women's Tennis Association never wanted anyone to see. Millions seemed to disappear. Fans quietly pulled away. And suddenly, the same player who carried all the excitement was being looked at as the reason things unraveled. But here's the part that doesn't quite add up, the piece no one is really breaking down. Was she ever truly the cause of it all falling apart?
Alexandra Eala is not overhyped. She did beat Laura Siegemund, which is not an easy opponent to have, in 3 sets in Miami. This was such a mentally challenging game, but Alexandra Eala, she came out on top and she did defeat Laura Siegemund. So the final score being 6-7, 6-3, 6-3 after Alexandra Eala drops the first set to a tiebreak. And now this match was so intense. Laura Siegemund is not an easy opponent to have at all. She's someone who does expand the rulebook to the maximum of what's legal, which then in a match means that Laura Siegemund likes to use, you know, strategic toilet break.
Instead, what they uncovered felt like a contradiction that simply didn't add up on paper. The projections had missed by $4.7 million, and in an instant, what was supposed to be a celebration quietly transformed into a search for someone to blame. At first, the questions lingered in the background, almost hesitant. Then they sharpened. Then they turned personal. Within hours, the focus shifted from what went wrong to who could be held responsible, and somehow it circled back to the very player who had drawn all the attention in the first place. That's where the story takes an uncomfortable turn, because according to the internal breakdown moving through executive circles, the problem was never about empty seats or fading interest. It was something much more precise. The entire financial framework of the tournament had been built on one fragile assumption, that Alexandra Eala would keep winning. And the moment she didn't, everything around it began to shake. Broadcast partners had aligned their schedules around her matches. Sponsors had secured courtside presence, expecting to ride her momentum deep into the event. In the simplest terms, she wasn't just part of the tournament, she had become the center of it. So when her run ended in the fourth round, the ripple was immediate. Premium tickets for the later stages lost their edge on the resale market. Broadcast slots once reserved for her suddenly felt less compelling. And sponsors who had invested in extended visibility were left with far less time in the spotlight than they had anticipated.
Being a global sport, how about the Filipino fans? For Alexandra Eala has become an absolute phenomenon on the courts. There's an early Verizon vantage point on TC Live. Everywhere she goes, she gets swarmed by her fans, Coco.
Swarmed is right, Steve. And look, this is the great thing. The security guard fumbled the rope, and that was almost the worst part of the event. But you can get as close and personal with your favorite players, and that's why I always say this event, the BNP Paribas Open, is the best fan experience you can possibly get. Alexandra Eala having her first opportunity at the main draw here at Indian Wells. That's how fresh and new she is to this game.
And that's the moment where the numbers truly began to unravel. The tournament had been aiming for more than $47 million in total revenue, yet when everything settled, the figure hovered closer to $42.5 million. On paper, it read like a failure. But in reality, it told a very different story, a system that had leaned too heavily on one single outcome. Instead of facing that truth head-on, something unexpected shifted the narrative. A confidential memo surfaced, and its tone left little room for interpretation. It spoke of an overdependence on one player's market pull and quietly warned about the danger of building financial expectations around someone who hadn't consistently gone deep at the highest level. It didn't take long for people to connect the dots. The message didn't need to be spelled out to be understood. But even that wasn't the full picture. Long before any player exited, the weather had already carved into the tournament's margins. Rain delays disrupted the rhythm, matches were cancelled, schedules collapsed, and refunds followed. Entire days disappeared, taking with them millions in concessions, merchandise, and adjusted ticket sales. That alone explained a significant piece of the missing revenue. Then came the complications with sponsorships. Deals that had been locked in months earlier were built on projections that no longer matched reality by the time the event actually unfolded. And when performance-based insurance clauses were triggered, payouts kicked in, quietly draining even more from the final total.
Throughout the match, there were Eala fans making out calls on the other player. I genuinely felt bad for the other player because that was clearly a hindrance, and it happened throughout the match repeatedly. And I looked up to see if she might have said anything, and I don't think she actually did. But there are fake posts by Eala's fans with what appears to be like AI generate images of Diana finger pointing, which never happened. In fact, at the end of the match, Diana crossed over and went to hug Eala to congratulate her. Some of these unhinged Eala fans are making weird videos that there's beef with her and Oprah and the ABC network, like she's someone that they need to protect. Listen, I love tennis, I love my Filipinos,
Then came the broadcasting side, and that's where things grew even more complicated. Networks had invested heavily, paying premium rates with the expectation of multiple high-interest matches built around Eala. When those moments never arrived, they were left scrambling to fill airtime with alternatives that simply didn't draw the same energy, eventually leading to compensation demands. When you connect all of these pieces, the $4.7 million gap stops feeling mysterious and starts looking like a domino effect set in motion long before the final match was played. But this is where the story takes a turn that genuinely frustrated people. None of those contributing factors were highlighted in the narrative that followed. Instead, the spotlight stayed fixed on one player, and that's when the backlash truly ignited. Fans, especially across the Philippines and the global diaspora, responded immediately and emotionally. players began to speak as well, first in quiet conversations, then with growing clarity. Jessica Pegula pointed out how unrealistic it is to expect a young athlete to carry the financial weight of an entire tournament. Coco Gauff echoed that sentiment even more directly, emphasizing that competing at the highest level is already demanding enough without adding business expectations on top. At that point, the pressure surrounding the situation became impossible to ignore. The Women's Tennis Association released a follow-up statement, softening its tone and clarifying that the memo was part of a broader internal review, not an attempt to single out any individual. But by then, the damage had already spread too far. The conversation had moved beyond revenue and projections. It had become something deeper, something harder to repair. It had become about trust.
Eala goes off on Laura Siegemund, hopefully I pronounced that right, defeating Siegemund despite her dirty tactics in the Miami Open. By the way, Miami's like 4 hours from me or 3 hours from me. I might have to watch one of her tennis matches. Regardless, people mention this video a lot, linking it over saying, you have to check this out, man. Some dirty tactics were used, but regardless, she came out on.
And trust, once shaken, doesn't simply reset. It lingers, it echoes, it changes how every decision is viewed moving forward. In the middle of all that noise, Alexandra Eala did something almost unexpected. She stayed silent. No dramatic statements, no public pushback, no attempt to wrestle control of the narrative. She left Miami, went home, and quietly shifted her focus to what comes next. But that silence carried weight more than any press conference ever could. Because when you actually look at what she did on the court, the idea that she was ever the problem begins to fall apart. She battled through long matches, adapted to difficult conditions, and stood toe-to-toe with higher-ranked opponents with a level of composure that rarely shows up at that stage of a career. She handled her responsibility. Everything else, everything that unraveled around her, belonged to a different system entirely. And that leads to the question no one in that conference room seemed willing to answer out loud. Alexandra Eala's popularity was never the issue.
I think these courts will suit her game a lot better because everything gets slowed down for the lefty to be able to start working the angles, working that forehand line. But she is in that killer section of where all those big hitters are that Chris mentioned earlier. She's got to get through some big players to be able to even contend in round of 16.
Yeah, but I think that this fanfare that she's been getting over the past few months can cause some players to do some incredible things. We saw it in Australia. There were mobs and lines of people to make it to her side courts. Hopefully, we're able to get her in a big court so everyone is able to stay safe.
If anything, it may be the most valuable asset the tour holds right now. She draws in new audiences, injects fresh energy, and creates a level of engagement that simply cannot be manufactured. But when that kind of popularity exists without the right structure around it, it starts to carry weight. And when that weight is placed in the wrong direction, pressure quietly transforms into blame.
Eala has been one of the success stories on the WTA Tour in the last few years, but did you know she holds a terrible 0-10 record heading in to the Qatar Open? Filipina star will compete at the first WTA 1000 event of the year, but she will have to change a terrible record that she holds if she wants to get past the first round. In her career, Eala has played 10 matches against Czech players.
As the tour moves forward into the clay season, the spotlight will inevitably shift again. New tournaments, new matchups, new storylines will take over. The noise around Miami will fade on the surface, but underneath, the questions will remain, because now everyone has seen what unfolds behind the scenes when expectations aren't met. And the next time a player begins to draw that level of attention, the real challenge won't be creating the hype, it will be managing it. So the story is no longer just about a fourth-round exit or a financial shortfall. It's about whether the system chooses to learn from what just happened or quietly sets itself up to repeat it. Because if one player can generate millions in attention, energy, and revenue, what happens when the system starts expecting her to hold it all together? Once that line is crossed, the story stops being just about tennis and becomes something far more difficult to control. And the irony is almost impossible to ignore. The later rounds of the Miami Open still delivered elite players, high-level tennis, and everything that should, in theory, keep audiences fully engaged.
Let me tell you, I'm definitely not normally like this when I lose.
No.
But this was definitely a special circumstance. I remember the last couple of match points, I was able to save a match point, you know.
Yeah.
And I just tried to prolong the match as long as I could because I knew that this is where I wanted to be. And then after I sat down, after the handshake, I looked up and just so many flags of the Philippines and so many Filipinos. It was past midnight, they were there to stay, and I had just had the best.
But something felt different. The early buzz that had built so much momentum simply didn't carry through the later rounds. Crowd reactions softened, the online conversation slowed, and even the resale market quietly revealed the shift as ticket prices dipped the moment her name disappeared from the schedule. And that contrast is where things become hard to ignore. When she's on court, the atmosphere feels like an event. When she's not, it feels like just another tournament. That difference may seem small, but financially it's enormous. Which leads to a question the Women's Tennis Association can no longer avoid. If one player can create that kind of gap in attention, why wasn't there a safety net when she exited? Because this isn't entirely new. Instead, everything leaned too heavily in one direction, and when that direction shifted, the structure beneath it began to strain. Not collapse, but crack just enough to reveal how fragile it really was. And this is where the tension quietly rises again. Because inside those rooms, this is no longer just about recovering revenue. It's about control.
I can't speak for the future and what will actually happen when I arrived to Miami, but the Miami last year was a beautiful time for me, and it, like you said, was the start of all of this. But since then, I've achieved a lot as well, and I've grown a lot, and I've had so many good matches, so many tough losses, so much experience since then, and that's helped me build confidence, self-esteem, and I know that I belong.
When a player begins to outgrow the system's ability to manage the expectations around her, the response usually falls into one of two paths. Either the system adapts and evolves alongside her, or it tries to rebalance the narrative before the power shifts too far in one direction. What the Miami fallout suggests is that the second option may already be unfolding. Not in loud, headline-grabbing moves, but in quieter adjustments, subtle shifts in marketing focus, broader promotion across a wider pool of players, and a careful effort to spread attention more evenly so that no single exit can create that same kind of vacuum again. And that brings everything back to Ella, who, without saying a word, now finds herself at the center of one of the most revealing moments the tour has seen in years. While the conversations continue behind closed doors, her focus has already moved forward. The clay season presents a completely different challenge. Slower surfaces, longer rallies, more time to build each point, and in many ways, it aligns perfectly with the style she has been refining. And that's where things become fascinating again, because if she begins to make deeper runs on clay, the entire narrative can shift almost overnight. The same conversations about risk and inconsistency would quickly transform into discussions about growth, adaptation, and breakthrough potential. The system that once questioned its reliance on her would once again find itself benefiting from the very momentum it struggled to control. And if that moment comes, the real test won't be whether she can handle the spotlight. It will be whether the system itself has learned anything from what just unfolded. Because this is no longer just about a single tournament's financial report. Now, the only question left hanging in the air is the one nobody in that original meeting could fully answer. If the tour already knows how much energy, revenue, and global attention one player can generate, why did it take her losing for everyone to realize just how dependent it had become?